The great auditorium of Georgetown University Law Center had never felt this silent before. Rows of students, professors, and journalists sat frozen in anticipation. All eyes were fixed on the small figure seated at the center of the stage, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Though her frame appeared fragile, her presence filled the room with a quiet authority. Decades of history sat beside her, not just as a jurist, but as a living symbol of perseverance and intellect. On the other side of the stage stood Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, her stance sharp, her energy unmistakably fiery. The tension between them wasn't personal. It was philosophical. It was generational. When Crockett finally spoke, her voice cut through the still air. "Justice Ginsburg," she began, "with all due respect to your legacy, your cautious approach to women's rights has failed us." A ripple of disbelief swept across the audience. Some gasped. Others whispered quietly to their neighbors. Crockett didn't hesitate. "Your friendship with Justice Scalia, the man who opposed so many of our fundamental rights, is not a sign of civility. It's a symbol of surrender. Compromise with those who deny justice is not progress. It's betrayal." The words struck like a gavel. The moderator shifted nervously in his seat. Professors avoided eye contact. Students held their breath. On stage, Justice Ginsburg calmly removed her glasses and set them on the table before her. Her expression remained controlled, but the faint tightening of her jaw revealed what few had ever seen: irritation. The confrontation that followed would become one of the most talked-about moments in modern American legal history. And it began right here, at the Georgetown Symposium on Women and the Constitution. The event had been designed to honor Ginsburg's lifetime of service, from her early battles against gender discrimination in the 1970s, to her pioneering leadership at the ACLU's Women's Rights Project, and finally, her decades on the Supreme Court, where she reshaped the legal foundation of equality in America. By this point, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was not just a justice, she was an icon. Her likeness appeared on mugs, shirts, and even action figures. To millions, she was the notorious RBG, a legend who fought the good fight. One case at a time, but not everyone agreed her careful. Incremental style still worked in today's divided political climate. Many younger progressives saw her patience as weakness. Some even argued that by refusing to retire under President Obama, she had risked her own legacy and the future of the court. Jasmine Crockett represented that new generation. At 42, the Texas Congresswoman had risen quickly in national politics. A civil rights attorney turned lawmaker, she was bold, direct, and unafraid of confrontation. Her speeches on the House floor regularly went viral. Her style was the opposite of Ginsburg's. Loud where Ginsburg was quiet, confrontational where Ginsburg was strategic. The organizers had hoped this symposium would bridge two philosophies: the patient reformer and the urgent activist. Instead, it became a collision. Crockett's criticism grew sharper. "Your so-called friendship across the aisle," she said, "has only empowered those who strip rights away. While conservatives dismantled decades of progress, you stayed polite. You normalized their cruelty." Some audience members shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded, secretly agreeing. Then, holding up a document, Crockett declared, "Here are Justice Scalia's votes. Against women's rights, against LGBTQ rights, against voting rights, and yet, you still called him your best friend." The moderator tried to intervene. "Congresswoman, perhaps we should—" Crockett cut him off. "This is the substance," she said. "When we treat oppressors as colleagues instead of threats, we legitimize oppression itself." Her tone hardened. "Your refusal to retire under Obama was selfish. You gambled with the rights of millions just to hold on to power. The crowd reacted audibly this time. Murmurs, sighs, disbelief. Yet Ginsburg sat unmoving, her composure unwavering. Even when Crockett made a factual mistake, accusing Ginsburg of authoring a majority opinion she had, in fact, dissented against, the justice remained silent. It wasn't arrogance. It was control. Decades of it. When the Congresswoman finally paused, the moderator turned toward Ginsburg. "Justice, would you like to respond?" The room fell still again. Every camera light turned red. Ginsburg leaned slightly toward the microphone. "I would," she said softly. Her voice, though quiet, carried to every corner of the auditorium. Debate, after all, is the heart of democracy. She folded her hands neatly on the table. "What we have here," she continued, "is not a disagreement of personalities, but of philosophies. A question as old as reform itself. Should change come slowly through persuasion, or quickly through confrontation?" Then she began her defense. "When I first began fighting gender discrimination in the 1970s, she said, the law was not on our side. Women could be legally fired for becoming pregnant. Banks denied credit to unmarried women. Marital rape wasn't even recognized as a crime. I chose to fight that world case by case, not because I lacked fire, but because I understood how the law works. Every victory creates the foundation for the next one." Her tone grew firmer. "You call that slow. I call it building an unshakable wall of precedent." She glanced toward Crockett. "When I stood before an all-male Supreme Court arguing that gender bias was unconstitutional, I didn't scream. I persuaded, and I won. That wasn't weakness. It was strategy." She turned to another page of notes. "You also question my friendship with Justice Scalia," she said. "Let me tell you what that friendship accomplished." The audience leaned forward. "In United States versus Virginia, the case that finally opened the Virginia Military Institute to women, Scalia's early drafts contained language that would have weakened the decision. Through our conversations, I convinced him to remove that language. He never changed his vote, but his opinion changed. And that change protected women's rights for generations." She looked directly at Crockett. "Would you call that surrender?" "I call it progress." The room was silent again. Even those who had sympathized with Crockett were now rethinking their stance. Ginsburg continued. "You say my dissents are symbolic, but symbols shape the future. A dissent tells tomorrow's lawyers where the next battle lies. When I wrote that throwing away pre-clearance was like tossing aside your umbrella in a storm just because you weren't getting wet, that wasn't a metaphor. It was a warning. And today, activists use that very line in courtrooms to defend voting rights." She took a sip of water, then said calmly, "You also criticize my decision not to retire under President Obama. I made that decision based on my health and my duty at that moment. No one can predict the future. Only act in good faith with the knowledge they have." Then her tone sharpened. "But let's not pretend there's only one way to create change. Movements need both fire and focus. While I built precedents one case at a time, others marched and protested. Those two forces, persuasion and passion, have always worked together." For the first time, Crockett's confidence seemed to waver. She lowered her gaze, absorbing every word. Ginsburg's voice softened. "Do not mistake patience for passivity. Do not confuse civility with surrender." The justice leaned closer to the microphone. "I too grow impatient at the slow pace of progress, but change that lasts must be built to endure." Her final words were measured, deliberate. "Movements need many kinds of warriors. Some march in the streets, some argue in the courts. Together, they bend the arc of history toward justice." The hall erupted in applause. Even Crockett joined in. What followed was not humiliation. It was revelation. The Congresswoman later admitted that the exchange changed how she thought about advocacy itself. In an article days later, she wrote, "Maybe we need both. The RBGs who build the legal foundations, and the activists who demand change now. One without the other can't survive." Clips from the debate flooded the internet. Headlines called it the masterclass in strategy. Students across the country debated which woman was right, and for once, it seemed both were. Months later, in her final public speech before retiring, Justice Ginsburg reflected on that moment. She said, "Each generation must decide how it will fight for equality. Some build slowly, others move fast. Both are needed, but whichever path you take it with purpose." Years later, Congresswoman Crockett stood in the House chamber quoting Ginsburg as she introduced a new bill expanding voting rights. Her voice steady, she read, "Throwing away pre-clearance is like tossing away your umbrella in the middle of a rainstorm." That bill passed, with bipartisan support, and history completed its quiet circle. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's legacy lived on, not just in law books, but in the minds of those she once inspired, including the very people who once challenged her. Because in the end, the true measure of leadership is not silence or surrender, but the wisdom to know when to fight and when to teach.